The famous ex-president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, passed away on the 5th of December 2013. But many people were surprised when they found out about this event, as they were certain that he passed away while incarcerated on Robben Island. This is an example of a collective false memory, and since then, many more examples have cropped up online. These instances are referred to as the Mandela Effect, as many people feel history has been changed somehow by powers unknown to us. Demi Lovato is an Albuquerque native who made waves in the music world when she released her debut album called Don't Forget in 2008. It debuted at number 2 on the US Billboard 200, and when she released the follow-up to this the following year, she saw even more success, as Here We Go Again debuted at number 1. She's amassed a huge fan base since then, but not everyone knows that she's a multi-instrumentalist who can play the drums, piano, and guitar along with her singing ability, and has composed more than 100 songs as a result. She's been performing since she was just 5 years old, and as a result, she became good friends with another pop star, Selena Gomez, who she met while on the set of the Barney and Friends show, where she played the part of a character called Angela. Before finding fame, she and Selena created a YouTube channel called The Demi and Selena Show, and made her first appearance on the Disney Channel on a show called As the Bell Rings, where she played the character of Charlotte. Furthering her acting career, she played the part of Michi Torres in the movie Camp Rock, and has gone on to play parts in other movies including Child Star, Simply Complicated, Smurfs: The Lost Village, and Charming. Her parents decided that she should become homeschooled after it became apparent that she was being bullied in public school, and this decision paid off as she graduated high school a year earlier than she should have. But her life has had some dark moments too. For some time, she struggled with eating disorders, including bulimia and anorexia, and in 2011 she was diagnosed as having bipolar disorder. Despite this, her career has been a very successful one that saw her release 8 studio albums, all of which reached the Billboard 200 chart. 4 songs from those albums have featured on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, and some of her songs and music videos have reached over 1 billion views on YouTube and Spotify. Lovato is somewhat of a philanthropist who involves herself with various charities dealing with mental health issues and education. She's one of the most followed musicians on Instagram and X, and has been nominated for 2 Grammy Awards. In 2016, she was included in Forbes' 30 Under 30 list, which acknowledges young musicians under 30 who've made significant contributions to the music industry, and has also been named as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. It's safe to say that Lovato has millions of faces around the world who are very familiar with her music, which makes it all the more baffling that one of those songs has become the focus of a Mandela Effect mystery. The song in question is called La La Land, which was released in 2008. At one point in the song, she sings the lyrics, "I'm not a supermodel, I still eat at Ronald's," referring to the fast food chain McDonald's. But this has left many people baffled, as they distinctly remember the lyrics being, "I still eat at McDonald's." One Redditor stated that they remember hearing the Ronald's lyric and thinking that she most likely used this word to stay out of trouble with the brand, but soon realized that they were wrong. The truth is that both versions of the lyrics exist. Fellow Redditors responded by saying that the Ronald's version was used in the song's music video so that it could be played during commercial breaks on the Disney Channel without infringing on copyright. By now, just about everyone on the planet is familiar with SpongeBob SquarePants, one of the most popular cartoons that's ever been produced. The show is set under the sea in an area called Bikini Bottom, where SpongeBob and his friends have many strange and wacky adventures. He has 2 neighbors, Squidward, who works as a cashier at the Krusty Krab restaurant where SpongeBob is a fry cook, and Patrick Star, his dim-witted best friend who lives under a rock 2 doors down from SpongeBob's pineapple house. Some of his other friends include Larry the lifeguard, a lobster who patrols the beach and who lives life to the fullest, and Gary, his pet snail, who's been known to cause a fair bit of chaos on occasion. But there's one creature that doesn't belong under the ocean, another of SpongeBob's good friends, a squirrel named Sandy Cheeks who hails from Texas, but she's no ordinary squirrel. When Sandy became an adult, she joined a company called Tree Dome Enterprises, which recognized her talents as an engineer, physicist and marine biologist, and as a result they asked her to move to Bikini Bottom to study life under the ocean. Upon her arrival there, she constructed a glass waterproof dome to live in safely, and before long she became an accepted resident of the town. She and SpongeBob found that they have a love for karate in common and can often be seen sparring together, usually with hilarious results. She's the one responsible for bringing the Christmas holiday to Bikini Bottom. In one episode, she puts up a Christmas tree with lights, but it's mistaken for a fire by SpongeBob. She then explains what the holiday is all about, prompting SpongeBob to share it with the rest of the town's inhabitants. When Santa Claus comes for his first visit, the residents mistake him for some kind of horrible monster, and it's up to Sandy to explain that he's there to bring them all gifts. Some fans have speculated that SpongeBob has a crush on Sandy, but this has never been a plot point in the show, and remains a rumor. While Sandy doesn't feature in every episode, she quickly becomes a fan favorite for her sassy attitude and southern drawl, along with the strange and original inventions that she creates while living under her dome. But despite her popularity, Sandy is now included in the list of Mandela Effect cases, as some fans of the show seem to remember her a little differently than she actually appears in the cartoon. Many people who have rewatched the episodes were taken aback when they realized that she doesn't wear a backpack on her back. Some people remember it being gray, while others recall it being purple, but it's now seemingly disappeared. Some fans tried to explain this puzzlement by suggesting that they're confusing her jetpack, which she wears when she's donning her spacesuit, with a backpack. But thousands of people believe the cartoon has been changed over the years and that Sandy's backpack really did exist in the past. One commenter stated that he had a Sandy squirrel toy when they were younger, and that he remembered it having a detachable backpack, suggesting that she had to have had one in the show as well. The reality is that she never wore a backpack, and some fans are having a case of collective false memory. But the mystery lives on the internet and will likely be discussed for some time to come. Wite-out is a correctional fluid brand that most people are familiar with, since they would have used it in school to correct many mistakes that they made while writing in ink. But the product also goes by other names depending on where it's sold. In some countries it's called Tip-X, liquid paper, Snowpake, and in the US, Wite-out is the most famous brand. The product was developed in the 1950s by a woman called Bette Nesmith Graham, an artist and secretary who no doubt spent many hours using a typewriter. She realized that errors on a typewriter take a lot of time to correct, since that page would either have had to be retyped or crossed out and corrected, which didn't have the neatest result. Added to this was the fact that some typists would only be paid for error-free work, and any mistake could take some time to rectify. As soon as she had the idea for a correction fluid, Bette started experimenting with different types of liquid, including water-based paints. She soon fine-tuned her formula, and the product proved to be so popular that she realized she'd stumbled upon a great commercial opportunity. She started bottling the liquid, and soon it had a massive impact on the office environment, as typists were now saving hours correcting mistakes on the fly, rather than having to retype entire pages. Before long, word of the product started to spread, and offices from all over were using it every day. Office work was being completed more efficiently, and in 1956, Bette decided to start her own company called Mistake-out. She remained a secretary though, and spent her evenings at home developing the product to make it as perfect as she could. As more companies started buying the correction fluid, she decided a catchier name was needed, and she changed the brand to Liquid Paper. Following this, the brand took off, and before long, it became a household name that was not only being used in offices but also in homes and schools all over the US. Taking the brand even further, she started selling different colors of liquid paper, and when Bette acquired a patent for the product, her success was ensured. The proof of its usefulness lies in the fact that it's still being used today, 7 decades after it was first invented. The Wite-out brand is as popular as ever, but today it's also spoken about as a Mandela Effect mystery. Many people who have used the product for a long time remember the name being spelled W-H-I-T-E out rather than W-I-T-E out, some being adamant that the name has been changed. Others state that they've always known it to have the current spelling, and that some other people just have bad memories and refuse to admit it. The brand is still very much alive and well today, as it's used in offices, schools, and homes all over the world every day. While it may be known by different names in different areas, it serves the same useful purpose that it has since its creation, and will undoubtedly continue to do so for many decades to come. Wite-out is just one of many brand names that are misremembered by thousands of people, and many more are sure to follow. The Mona Lisa painting is without a doubt one of the most famous pieces of art ever created. It was painted on poplar wood in 1503 by the artist Leonardo da Vinci, and today it's displayed in the Louvre Museum in Paris, France. It'll come as a surprise to some people that it wasn't really a famous painting until 1911, when it was stolen from the Louvre by a former employee of the museum, Vincenzo Peruggia, and two accomplices. The three men waited until the museum was about to close, and then hid in a storage closet. They spent the night in the closet and waited until daybreak before emerging, removing the painting, wrapping it in cloth, and then making their escape through one of the museum's side doors. Unsurprisingly, no one noticed that it was gone until an artist visited the museum about 28 hours later and found the wall where it used to hang empty. Pablo Picasso was considered a suspect for a while, but he was soon cleared of any wrongdoing after he was questioned by the police. For 2 years, no one could figure out who the culprits were, but then Peruggia contacted an Italian art dealer, stating that he wanted to transport the Mona Lisa to Italy. The dealer immediately contacted the authorities, and the thief was finally arrested in December of 1913. He was handed a 1-year and 15-day sentence, but was ultimately released after serving 7 months behind bars. The painting was then returned to the Louvre, but not before it was shown at several locations across Italy. Since then, the Mona Lisa has become a household name, and it's viewed by hundreds of thousands of people at the Louvre every year. One can only wonder whether it would ever have become as famous as it is if it weren't for Peruggia and his accomplices. Anyone familiar with the painting has likely seen it hundreds of times on television, in books, and online, which would lead one to believe that they're familiar with its details. But this simply isn't the case, as thousands of people believe it's been changed recently. The first thing they claim has been altered is the strange expression on her face, something that's been discussed in art circles for over a century. Some people claim she never had the faint smile that she now has, and some have gone as far as to state that it looks as though someone has altered it using Photoshop. But this is hardly anything new. Art lovers have debated the enigmatic smile for a long time, with some claiming she's smiling while others think she's actually smirking. Some critics hail this expression as a token of Da Vinci's talent, since he seems to have captured a very unusual expression that would not have been easy to recreate. Some commenters on this mystery claim that she did have a smile, but that it was far less prominent than it is now, hence the debate that it created. But this is not the only Mandela effect regarding the Mona Lisa. While it isn't immediately apparent, she is wearing a very thin black veil on her head, a detail that many people have failed to notice, and now claim to have been added after the fact. There's no way to definitively prove whether the painting has been altered, but the debate regarding this will rage on for a long time to come, as more people suddenly realize that they have a false memory of the image. The Mandela Effect's case involving the famous actor Tim Curry is one of the closest examples to the original, the passing of Nelson Mandela, as many people are shocked to learn that he's still alive. Curry became a household name in 1975 when he starred in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which many people consider to be his best performance, along with his appearance as Pennywise the Clown in the horror miniseries It, which was adapted from the Stephen King novel. He originally hails from Grappenhall, a village in Cheshire, England. Before becoming famous as a movie actor, he concentrated on theater performances, but his portrayal as Dr. Frank Infurter is the role that kickstarted the rest of his iconic career. But he isn't just a great actor, as he's also released several music albums, with many fans praising the quality of his voice, a character that he has also utilized to land many voice acting roles. While he's had a successful and lucrative career, many people find it hard to accept that he's still acting and doing voiceover work, since they're convinced that he passed away some time ago. Some of these instances are understandable, since there's been more than one report claiming that he passed away, only for it to be revealed that it was a hoax. Some people never learned the truth, and hence never realized that he's still alive. But in recent times, hundreds of people have posted to their social media accounts and sites like Reddit, stating that they just found out Curry is still alive, and it's left them in a state of confusion. Some feel that he lost his life sometime in the 2010s, and even remember posting to Facebook that it left them shocked and saddened. Others remember him passing away long before that, or more recently in the 2020s. In an effort to explain this, it's been pointed out that he had a stroke in July of 2012, which left him without the use of his legs. He now uses a wheelchair, but still takes on acting and voiceover roles. While this is a known fact, thousands of people refuse to accept it and have stated that they feel the past has been altered. Some have gone as far as to suggest that they somehow ended up in an alternate reality where Tim Curry never passed away, which has caused them a lot of anxiety. This is a common trope with the Mandela Effect. Some people blame CERN and the Large Hadron Collider for what they believe is a shift in realities, while others think that our reality has collided with another, which they think has caused some events in our history to become muddled up with events in another. When referring to someone who has a very short memory, people often use the phrase goldfish memory. This is because everyone knows that a goldfish has a memory of about 3 seconds or so. But as it turns out, this is far from accurate. It's a misconception that's been spread across the world over the decades, and people are taken by surprise when they learn that this simply isn't true. Many misconceptions exist when it comes to goldfish. Most people assume that they aren't very smart, likely because they've been misinformed about their memories, and therefore they assume that these fish don't have brains, which scientists find laughable. Not only do they have brains, but they also possess some qualities that humans don't. They're able to see infrared and ultraviolet light, and can see a much wider range of colors than humans do. This helps them find food in shadowy and dark areas underwater, despite not having the best eyesight. They can't see very far into the distance, and thanks to the positioning of their eyes on the sides of their heads, they have a blind spot right in front of their heads. Goldfish may seem like mundane, common creatures, but they're actually far more complex than one might think. Not many people know that they don't have tongues, but this doesn't hamper their ability to taste food, since they do so using their lips instead, as this is where their taste buds are positioned. They also don't have stomachs. Their food is chewed with a set of teeth which are located in the backs of their throats, and from there it merely passes through their systems via a long intestine, which means that the nutrients they get from their food are distributed through their bodies much faster. Scientists are able to determine the age of a goldfish, much like they can calculate the age of a tree. They merely need to look at the fish's scales, since they grow a new ring of scales every year. This process is much more involved though, and requires the use of a microscope. It's also a little-known fact that if it weren't for the sun and other light sources, goldfish would be all white. Light enables them to produce pigment, which gives them their orange color, and without it, they would look a lot less remarkable. It's also a common misconception that these fish have orange scales. In reality, their scales are completely see-through, allowing their orange skin to show through, and creating the impression that we're looking at orange scales. Most goldfish have black pupils, but while studying albinos of the species, scientists discovered that they actually have pink pupils instead. They also have one other trait that trumps humans, and that they have one extra sense. They share the sense of touch, taste, sound, smell, and hearing with us, but they're also able to discern changes in pressure when it comes in the form of currents and vibrations under the water. On the side of their bodies, they have a row of dots that allow them to sense these changes. They're very interesting creatures, despite what most people believe, and in recent times they've become discussed as a Mandela Effect example, since people refuse to believe that they have memories longer than 3 seconds. But science has proven this to be the case. These studies likely went unnoticed by a lot of people who never learned that the old adage of goldfish memory had been disproven. Energizer batteries are used by millions of people around the world on a daily basis, and its mascot, the Energizer Bunny, is an image most of us will be familiar with, since we've all seen the advertisements on TV and online. But for the past few years, internet users have been talking about Energizer and Duracell batteries in regards to the Mandela Effect, since they distinctly remember the iconic bunny being used to advertise Duracell batteries and not Energizer. They recall seeing ads in which the bunny was playing a snare drum that was fastened to its chest, along with several other toys that used batteries from alternate brands. All the other toys would eventually run out of battery life, but the bunny would keep on playing its drum, seemingly forever. The pink Duracell bunny was first created in 1973, and for the next 15 years it remained the brand's mascot that became known to just about everyone who ever used the batteries. But in 1988, Duracell failed to renew their trademark for the bunny, and this is where the confusion comes in, resulting in what many people mistakenly believe to be a Mandela Effect case. The Duracell bunny ad campaigns were a thing of the past, but they were soon replaced by very similar advertisements from Energizer, Duracell's biggest competitor. Soon after the trademark lapsed, Energizer released an ad with a bunny of their own, complete with its own drum and a pair of sunglasses. When the campaign proved to be successful, Energizer decided to file for a trademark, but Duracell then filed for its original trademark, stating that they were the first to come up with this specific concept. But by this time, they had missed the boat. This resulted in a dispute between the two companies, and ultimately they came to an agreement that would see the Energizer bunny being used as a mascot in the US and Canada, while Duracell could use it in the rest of the world. It seemed like an amicable trade-off, but they would be back in court again in 2016, when Energizer started noticing the image of the Duracell bunny being included on Duracell products in the US. It turned out that these products were being imported from Europe, and Duracell was ordered to put an end to the bunny being displayed on their products. They were also ordered to pay about $179,000 Canadian in damages. Many people believed the confusion between the two bunnies to be a legitimate Mandela effect, but more than enough proof exists to show that they both existed at one time or another, and that this is merely a case of many people having poor memories. The dodo bird serves as a stark reminder to humans of the many animals that used to live on our planet, but that have now gone extinct, never to be seen again. They used to live on the island of Mauritius and were discovered by Portuguese sailors in 1507, though some sources state that they were discovered as late as 1598. Not many people know that if scientists are correct, dodos supposedly evolved from pigeons that settled in the area. The pigeons found this area to be very suited to their diet and preference of habitat, and over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, they became flightless, since they had no natural predators in the area. They would eventually evolve into much larger birds than their pigeon predecessors, standing around 3 feet tall and weighing about 50 pounds. But their comfort on the island came at a cost. They'd become so docile that Dutch settlers reported seeing them walking right up to humans with no fear, which was ultimately their undoing. Added to this was the fact that their numbers increased very slowly. They only laid one egg at a time, rather than producing several offspring like most other birds. Since birds only lay enough eggs to propagate the species, the dodo didn't need to lay multiple eggs since there was no threat to their offspring. But this would also become a factor in their extinction. Despite what many people have been taught over the years, the dodo didn't taste particularly good, and this is where this case of the Mandela effect comes in. Many people believe these birds became extinct because they were easily hunted by humans for food, but this is a misconception. The truth is that they met their fate at the hands of other animals. While humans would have no doubt hunted and eaten some dodos, we were by no means the primary cause for their demise, though we are directly responsible. After the island was discovered, more and more ships traveled to the area for exploration. Along with these ships came creatures like mice, rats, cats, and pigs that then made their way onto the land and started looking for a food source. The dodo quickly became their primary target, since they had no idea that their lives were in danger. The newly introduced creatures would not only hunt the birds, but they also raided their nests, which had a disastrous effect on the dodo population, since they only produced one egg every now and then. A few dodos were saved from this fate by explorers who loaded them onto their ships to be taken back to Europe. But since these journeys would often take months to complete, the birds were either eaten along the way or didn't survive that long. Today, we have only drawings and a few fragments of remains to remember these birds by. The Oxford Museum of Natural History houses a dodo head and a single foot, while the University of Copenhagen Zoological Museum and the National Museum of Prague each have small fragments of leg bones on display. It's clear that the animals introduced by humans were the cause for the dodo's demise, but many people are adamant that this fact has been recently added to the history books for reasons unknown. They have clear memories of being taught that they were a great source of food to the people who landed on the island, and furthermore that they were delicious to eat. When asked which animal is the king of the jungle, most people would guess that it's a lion. Few people would argue with this, since many children's books, TV shows, and movies state this as a fact. Furthermore, the song "The Lion Sleeps Tonight" is a very well-known track, and includes the lyrics, "In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight." But this is a misleading misconception that has led many people to believe that they're experiencing a Mandela Effect. The song is included on the soundtrack to the film The Lion King, which has likely caused even more confusion among those who believe lions to be the rulers of the jungle. But nothing could be further from the truth. While it's true that the lion is usually at the top of the food chain in whichever area it chooses to live, thanks to the female's prowess at hunting and their ability to prosper at times when there's precious little to eat, they live in the grassland savannas, or in the veldt, rather than in jungles. It would be more fitting to name the tiger, jaguar, or leopard as the king of the jungle, since they live in these areas and have very few natural enemies, which ensures that their species is able to survive without much effort. Jungles typically have an abundance of food for all the animals that live there, while lions often have to go weeks without food in the dry season, while also dealing with high temperatures and droughts. It's been suggested that this misunderstanding came about thanks to the fact that lions also have no natural predators, but the fact remains that they aren't found in jungles anywhere in the world. Another suggestion is that a male lion's mane resembles a crown, earning them the moniker of king, but a more accurate description can be found in India, where it's known as the king of the wild. In Hindi, the word for jungle means an uninhabited place, and perhaps we should call lions the kings of everywhere, rather than the jungle, since this is the one place where they don't live. If a lion was to be introduced into the jungle, it may not be as successful at surviving as its fellow large cats. They typically hunt their prey in packs and over large distances, which would be very hard to do in a dense forest. Some people feel that this saying has been taken a bit too seriously over the years, and that the phrase king of the jungle refers to their apex predator status, rather than the areas where they live. Still, referring to an animal as the ruler of an area where it's never lived is bound to create some confusion, and hence the term has now become part of the Mandela Effect. Most of us think of the Old West as a lawless era when outlaws did as they pleased until they were confronted by the town's sheriff. This would then result in a standoff or a full-blown firefight until one side was left standing. But many such beliefs about the Wild West simply aren't true. Many people believe that most cowboys were outlaws, but the fact is that most of them worked on ranches, tending to cattle in the ranch's grounds. Women at the time also played a much bigger role than most people realize. They helped the men rope, brand, and tend to the cattle on these ranches, and were often the ones who ensured that these animals were being properly cared for. In fact, some of the sharpest shooters of the era were women, while others were exceptional horse riders, often possessing a much higher skill level in these disciplines than the men around them. One fact that certainly is true is that cowboys didn't make much money, but while many people believe they were always trying to make ends meet, they were much more dedicated to lifestyle than the pursuit of riches. Most cowboys earned a salary of between $25 and $40, and this money was often used to explore rather than building a stable home life. While out in the wild, they would stock their wagons with beans, biscuits, beef, and coffee, enabling them to go on long journeys and cattle drives. Some of these drives or expeditions included a cook who prepared meals for everyone in the company. The meat was usually dried, salted, smoked, or pre-cooked, and then used in stews along with beans and other ingredients that fed more people than a piece of meat on its own. Once a cowboy felt that he'd mastered his skills on the ranch, they would often enter a rodeo contest to pit their skills against others. And this is where ranch owners would often look for new staff, who would then take up a position on the ranch. Those cowboys who lived in towns rather than on a ranch could often be seen in a saloon after a hard day's work, where they would enjoy a drink. And this is the first fact that's spoken about as a Mandela Effect. Many people were under the impression that there wasn't much choice of alcoholic drinks in the Old West. But the fact is that they could choose between beer, whiskey, many different flavors of liquor, rums, gins, and many other types of spirits. This belief likely came about thanks to Western movies that usually show cowboys only drinking beer and whiskey. The second Mandela effect has to do with the cowboys' leisure activities while visiting a saloon. In the movies, cartoons, and video games, they're often depicted sitting around a table in a saloon playing poker, but this was rarely the case. While it was a popular game in some areas, the most widely played card game at the time was called Pharaoh, so named for the depictions of pharaohs on the backs of playing cards. Blackjack was another popular pastime, having been brought to the West by the French community in New Orleans. Other popular gambling games included Mexican Monte, Roulette, Hazard, which was played with dice, Brag, and three-card Monte. While it's true that poker was played in some saloons, it certainly wasn't as popular as the movies would lead us to believe, and it certainly wasn't the only game available to be played. It's a strange Mandela effect case that's been debunked through a simple Google search, and yet many people still refuse to believe that cowboys had several gambling options aside from playing poker. Monopoly. Everyone knows the game that drove wedges between friends and family members. It's the most well-known real estate board game that can host anywhere between 2 to 8 players. The goal is to remain financially sound while forcing the other players into bankruptcy. This can be done by collecting rent on properties you own. Each side of the board is divided into 10 small rectangles, which represent a property, railroad, utility, jail, taxes, airports, and other events. One of the most notable features of the board game is the character in charge of it all, the self-made millionaire Mr. Monopoly, who was formerly known as Rich Uncle Pennybags. This icon finds himself as the focal point of 2 Mandela effects, one of which is the well-known monocle controversy. Many seem to recall that Mr. Monopoly wore a monocle, and it seems fitting given his depiction. He's supposed to be a portly old man, and already sports a top hat, tuxedo, and mustache. It almost seems like something is missing without his monocle. Many have tried to convince those affected by this Mandela effect that they're simply confusing the character with another prominent figure, Mr. Peanut. This icon wore a suit, top hat, and a monocle, and carried around a cane. He looked the part of the stereotypical wealthy man, alongside Mr. Monopoly, whose missing monocle makes him look less prestigious. But one Reddit user was able to find some residual evidence that the man did wear a monocle. In the Monopoly Junior board game, Mr. Monopoly can be seen on the $2 bills with the very eyepiece that we all remember. Additionally, the famous Jim Carrey movie, Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, holds another piece of evidence. In one scene, Carrey's character knocks out a rich, posh man who can be seen wearing a tuxedo, a monocle, and a fancy white mustache. He proceeds to parade around the unconscious man before dropping his head forward and making a mockery of the words, "Do not pass go, do not collect $200, a clear reference to the board game. But this isn't the only Mandela effect associated with the icon. It appears that there's also an ongoing debate about the man's name. One Reddit user took to the Mandela Effect subreddit and explained that they'd found another misconception about the icon. Aside from the disappearing monocle, his name had also changed. While it's now known to be Rich Uncle Pennybags, many recall it as Uncle Moneybags instead. This makes more sense since he carried a bag of money around with him, which possibly would contribute to the false memory. While many maintain the idea that his name was always Uncle Moneybags, others argue that everyone is just accepting this as a Mandela effect because that's what the name should logically be. One Reddit user even pointed out that there is a Mr. Moneybags, which may be adding to the misconception. In the game Spyro, in which players play a young purple dragon trying to find his way in the world, there's a character named Mr. Moneybags who takes the form of a monocle-wearing bear. That being said, there also exists a song titled Mr. Moneybags, with the main character in the song being the Monopoly Man, which means that this Mandela effect spans into the world of musicians too. Residual evidence for the name misconception can be found when it's merely just searched on Google. Almost every picture under the Mr. Moneybags search is the Monopoly Man. So is Google misremembering it too? The third and hopefully final Mandela effect concerning this board game refers to one other feature: auctions. There exists a part of the game where players can auction off the properties they buy. That's why it says mortgage value on the back of each card, followed by a number, which would be the starting cost. Many don't recall this as being part of the game at all, and have been playing it entirely wrong, much to their surprise. Most of the time, players would assume that if one person purchased a property of one color, then they automatically own all three of them, which they can then purchase if they land on it. If other players land on that street prior to them purchasing it, they're not allowed to buy it, if one of the three in that color suit has already been purchased. But this is actually not how the game works, and it never actually did in the first place, despite everyone playing it that way. Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas was released as an American stop-motion musical fantasy film in 1993. It tells the story of Jack Skellington, the main protagonist. He's a being from Halloween Town who opens a portal to Christmas Town to celebrate the holiday. We meet a variety of characters along the way that accompany Jack on his adventure. This includes his trusty ghost pup, Zero, the tritagonist. We're also joined by Jack's romantic interest, Sally, as well as Santa Claus and the mayor of Halloween Town. This Mandela effect concerns the appearance of the ghost dog, Zero, more specifically his nose. Most fans of the movie recall that the spectral hound had a glowing red nose in reference to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Despite this memory, though, it turns out that the dog's nose wasn't red at all, nor was it a Rudolph reference. The nose is actually depicted as a small glowing jack-o'-lantern in both the film and the merchandise that was later produced. It's a common misconception, given the way the movie goes in relation to the story of Santa Claus and Rudolph. In the movie Nightmare Before Christmas, Zero guides Jack's sleigh through the fog on Christmas Eve, all with the help of his glowing nose. It's easy to draw parallels between the dog and reindeer, whose noses are bright red, which is possibly where this misremembering comes from. Many believe that we may have the natural tendency to merge both nose designs, which may lead to a false memory. One Reddit user, though, distinctly recalls a red nose, and they aren't alone either. They explained that having a carved pumpkin in its place just seemed too detailed for a small nose. But there may be some residual evidence of this misconception. The Reddit user discovered that in the movie, within a 1-minute time frame, the nose takes on both appearances. At 32 minutes and 19 seconds, the nose clearly looks red, but at 32 minutes and 40 seconds, the jack-o'-lantern face becomes visible. It seems that when the alterations took place, they forgot to edit just this one scene where Zero's nose is clearly red and lacking in detail. Many of the commenters recall the nose being red as well. It made sense to them because the whole film was based on a Christmas aspect. Some believe, though, that perhaps there's something more to this false memory. They point out that when most people watched the film, it was probably on VHS or broadcast on television screens during a time when there was terrible color output. During this time, the black and white balance may have allowed very little detail on screen, so no one really noticed the jack-o'-lantern face. Recently, a new Mandela effect has taken social media by storm, leaving many social media users up in arms. It concerns the phrase "the bucket list," a term that many believe they used throughout their whole lives, and it certainly sounds like a phrase that was coined some time ago. It's frightened many to learn that it was actually brought into existence a lot more recently. The earliest known use of the term came in 2006, when it was used in the UPI Newswire. The term bucket list derived from an older term of kicked the bucket, which was found to be in use since at least the year 1785. A bucket list is the list of goals or achievements that one wants to accomplish before they kick the bucket or pass away. While it's a phrase mentioned once in 2006, it wasn't until 2007 that it was really popularized. Many have been shocked to find that the word was ultimately coined by the movie of the same name, starring Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman. The Bucket List is a 2007 American comedy drama movie written by Justin Zackham. The plot follows the terminally ill men who head out on a road trip with a wish list of things they want to do before kicking the bucket. A Reddit user called Prince Nelson brought this Mandela effect up in the subreddit dedicated to the strange misremembering phenomenon. He explained that the term was really coined in 2007 in the film. A According to Google, there's only one reference to the phrase being used prior to 2007, and that was in a book and an author's biography in 2006, which was updated in 2011. This means that the term could have been placed there in the updated version. One Reddit user never heard the term prior to the movie's release, but others recall having heard or used the term since at least the 70s. So either this is a collective misremembering, where the phrase did in fact only originate in 2007, or it was actually coined long before that and evaded media usage until 2007. Either outcome is pretty astonishing. That being said, there's actually some residual evidence for this Mandela effect too, and it takes the form of blog posts. In 2004, Erica Ferment added a blog post titled Graduation Bucket List. But one person in the Reddit post confirmed that the dates on these blogs can be altered again and again. Some who have been affected by this Mandela effect swear to have used the term in the 80s and 90s when making summer bucket lists with their friends, but none of them have been able to provide proof of their existence, or that they even referred to them as bucket lists to begin with. The only logical explanation for this Mandela effect is that it really is just the classic case of misremembering and possibly confusing the kick the bucket term. Everyone just assumed that it was a much older term given the use of the phrase from which it derived. Dragon Ball Z is a long-running sequel to the Dragon Ball anime. It's the adaptation of the second portion of the manga. In the series, we follow the life of Goku, who defends the Earth against various villains that range from intergalactic fighters to powerful androids and almost indestructible magical creatures. While the original Dragon Ball anime followed Goku's childhood, Dragon Ball Z accompanies him through his adult adventures. This Mandela effect actually has nothing to do with anything that took place in the show, and it also seems to be affecting mostly the people of Brazil. In fact, 80% of Brazilians have been affected by this particular Mandela effect. It was September 11th when the country's Dragon Ball Z watchers were staring at their screens, wide-eyed, as the episode of the Super Saiyan transformation was underway. It was an incredibly important episode for children of this time, and thousands of students even skipped school to watch Goku's special transformation. But as they stared at the screen in awe, there was an interruption. In the middle of the transformation, the show was cut, and the news came on, and it was an emergency broadcast telling American citizens of the tragedy that had just struck the World Trade Center. A mock-up of what occurred on the TV screen was created and posted to YouTube under the channel Canal Mundex. The video shows exactly how many Brazilians remember this happening. Strangely though, and much to their surprise, Dragon Ball Z wasn't even airing that day. Many point out that no parent would allow their child to skip school just to watch an episode, and the episode wouldn't have even aired if the target audience wasn't around to watch it. Victims of this Mandela effect recalled that the popular anime was airing in the early morning hours on September 11, 2001 in Brazil. The show was popular among the youth at this time, and many social media users swear that they witnessed the interruption during the airing of this special episode. They even have others backing up their claims. Eventually, some internet users were able to track down the 2001 airing of the show, and Dragon Ball Z didn't even hit the screens at all that day. Further adding to this is that the episode that was supposedly interrupted that day didn't broadcast until 2002. Globo is the channel that was responsible for airing the series in Brazil, but it's been discovered that they didn't broadcast a single episode of the show in 2001, which just bewilders the Brazilians even more. They were forced to accept the idea that this entire event was nothing more than a shared daydream that was etched into their psyches. This particular case is among the more intriguing examples of the Mandela effect, since it affects more than half of the Brazilian Dragon Ball Z watchers. Scary Movie is a film parody franchise that began in 2000. 5 scary movies have been produced altogether, labeled as Scary Movie 1 to Scary Movie 5. Each of these films is a parody of well-known horror movies and characters. In 2001, Scary Movie 2 was released, with the main plot being The Haunting, a 1963 film. It also adds scenes from other well-known horrors and thrillers like The Exorcist, Poltergeist, The Amityville Horror, The Legend of Hell House, and Hollow Man. Hansen, the secondary antagonist in the franchise, marks the center of this odd Mandela effect that has left movie watchers questioning their very existence. Hansen is the caretaker and manservant at Hell House. His most obvious feature is his small, malformed hand, which he calls his strong hand. During the movie, he makes use of this hand as though it were just as functional as his other. He also stuck it in the mashed potatoes which he was preparing for the guests, which of course clearly repulsed them. One specific scene with Hansen and his strong hand is the subject of this misremembered memory. In one scene, one of the characters is dangling from the ledge outside of a window when Hansen rushes over and offers his malformed hand. And everyone can probably hear the exact line that he utters playing out in their minds right now: "Take my strong hand." Many viewers vividly recall this being the line that Hansen spoke when helping the other character. In fact, many have quoted this line in a similar context in real life. The problem is, he doesn't actually say this. Hansen instead said, "Take my hand. Come on, take my hand. You're gonna fall unless you take my hand." He doesn't say anything strong hand once in this scene. So why does so many people remember it? Memes have even been made in reference to this apparently misremembered quote, most of which refer to the window scene. A Reddit user brought this up on the Mandela Effect subreddit, but they remember the actual quote as "take my hand" and not "take my strong hand." They expressed that he's heard the line be misquoted numerous times, and when he tries to correct people on it, they simply don't believe him. The majority of movie watchers, though, seem to be in agreement that Hansen refers to his strong hand in this scene. The Reddit user, though, may have his own Mandela effect going on. In his original post, he refers to the real line being "take my little hand," which still isn't right. The character doesn't even describe his hand at all during the scene. One of the commenters explained that Hansen didn't even acknowledge the idea that his hand was small or different, which is why he referred to it as his strong hand, which adds to the joke. He's willfully unaware of his malformation, which is the whole point of his character. Yet the original poster seems to believe that he referred to his little hand and discredits the memories of those who believe that he referred to it as his strong hand. The Bible is filled with fantastical beasts like giants and other strange creatures. Each of these creatures formed part of the battles that some of the characters had endured. Much to the surprise of many, though, is that dragons also made their way into some biblical verses, but no one really remembers this. One person admitted to not being a routine Bible reader, but pointed out that he never heard the mention of dragons in the religious book before. In fact, it wasn't even mentioned in church. This was brought to the Reddit user Agreeable Cucumber 928's attention through a Facebook reel, where one comment suggested that dragons were the biblical explanation for dinosaurs. But the Reddit user was confused because he didn't recall the mention of the mythical beasts. After doing some digging around, he found that dragons were actually mentioned 35 times throughout the King James Version, the most popular version of the Bible. In some instances, though, the word dragon is a reference to a demonic entity or a beast, and not the mythical creature itself. But a larger group of people don't remember that dragons were ever mentioned throughout the entirety of the Bible. Some argue that the beast only appears in the book Revelation, the last book of the New Testament. But this isn't factual, though, since dragons have been mentioned another 21 times in the Old Testament as well, with a total of 14 mentions in the New Testament. Many have been left scratching their heads, as they never heard of the beasts in a biblical form before. Others argued that the Bible isn't referring to the six-limbed fire-breathing lizards at all, and that we should pay closer attention to the context in which the word is being used. Perhaps it's the context that allowed many to overlook the use of the word, adding to the false memory. Some even think that the dragons that the Bible refers to are actually just crocodiles. But regardless of what the creatures are meant to be or meant to symbolize doesn't really matter here. What does matter is the fact that a whole group of people don't remember that these beasts were ever mentioned or even referenced in the first place. Just like with many other Mandela effects, victims of this one seem to believe that this aspect was added later on, in hopes that no one noticed. But just like every other time, they did. The most relevant mentions of dragons can be found in verses like Job 41, verses 19 to 21, where it states, "Out of his mouth go burning torches, sparks of fire leap forth." Revelation 12 verse 9 says, "And the great dragon was thrown down." Revelation 12 verse 3 says, "A great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems." Dragons are mentioned again in Revelation 20 verse 2, where it says, "He lay hold of the dragon." And Isaiah 27 verse 1 speaks of Leviathan, the twisted serpent who lives in the sea. Minecraft is an open-world video game in which players can manipulate their environment that's composed of 3D blocks. They can build various things: fish, hunt, craft, and fight monsters. By 2023, it was the second highest-selling video game in history. There are a few playable modes, including Creative Mode, which allows players free range without addition of monsters, and Survival Mode, which forces players to build and craft from scratch while engaging in combat. Minecraft has many different blocks, items, mobs, weapons, armor, and more. This Mandela Effect concerns the Jukebox. This item was added later in the game and is made by combining planks and a diamond. Music can be played from this item using discs that players obtain. Parrots are known to dance to the music if they're within a 3-block radius. Discs can also be ejected from the jukebox for an alternative to being inserted. The Mandela effect surrounding this object concerns this very act, the ejection of the disc. Roxas the Lucario brought up a controversial topic on a subreddit dedicated to Minecraft. He explained that a debate erupted among his friend group over a feature that used to be in at least one of the Minecraft versions. The feature was that once the song stopped playing, the music disc would automatically be ejected from the jukebox. Half of the friend group was in agreement that this did in fact happen, while the other half swore that they had never experienced such a thing in any version of the game. He and his friends who were in agreement vividly remembered that the disc would pop out, and the user wondered if anyone else recalled this happening, and many Minecraft gamers did. One user even stated that they were too afraid to leave the jukebox unattended for fear that the popped-out disc would despawn. They'd been playing the Java edition since 2010, and didn't know when this feature suddenly disappeared. Others recalled that the disc would only eject if the player interacted with the item, or if they placed a different disc in it. This controversial issue, though, was only mentioned on the Minecraft subreddit and was never brought up in a Minecraft blog. A blogger posted a picture of the disc hovering beside the jukebox. His explanation was that in the old Minecraft, there were only 2 discs in the game, which were Cat and 13. According to him, there was a feature where the disc would fall out of the jukebox, but when he tried to find it on the Minecraft wiki, it didn't appear to exist. The commenters were shocked to learn that this never happened in the game, but maintained the idea that they remembered it. Again, one commenter on the blog post would stay nearby to make sure that they collected their disc in fear of it despawning and being lost forever. It appeared that most gamers remembered this happening, but it didn't. There's no residual evidence or even videos to confirm that this ever took place. The Minecraft wiki obviously favors the idea that one has to interact with the box for the disc to eject. In 1922, a professional basketball player named Charles Chuck Taylor joined Converse as a salesman. Within just a year, the company adopted some of his ideas, which made many improvements to their shoe designs. This included enhanced flexibility and ankle support, and soon the Converse Chuck Taylor All-Star sneaker was born. It even came with the distinctive All-Star logo designed for ankle protection. Just a few years ago, though, All-Star Converse wearers began noticing something odd in terms of the placement of the logo. 5 years ago, one such person appeared on the Mandela Effect subreddit, asking were the Chuck Taylor All-Star logos ever on the outside of the ankle. This is because many people who wore this brand recalled that the logo was always on the outside of the sneaker, and not the inner ankle. Some, of course, do remember the logo being on the inner ankle, but the question has certainly sparked some controversy. One Reddit user commented on this post more recently, claiming that they thought they'd gotten a messed up pair. They ordered some sneakers a month prior, and upon receiving them, they noticed that the logo was on the inside. This commenter thought that they just stepped into an alternate universe and was confused to find that the logo had always been this way. 2 years later, another poster was brought to the subreddit, questioning this same Mandela effect. Gardele revealed that they recall the Converse logo being on the outside of the shoe, and wondered if anyone else remembers this being the case. The debate was sparked again in the comments section, with half being opposed to the idea, recalling that the logo was always on the inner ankle, while the other half maintained that it was on the outside. Many images of the Converse Chuck Taylor shoes orient the shoe in a way that makes it appear that the logo is on the outside. This may be where the misconception is stemming from today, and could even be playing a part in the memories of those who once wore them. Wonderful Wander, another Reddit user, brought up this subject again on the same subreddit. They explained that they grew up in the 2000s emo phase and wore high tops all the time. In their adulthood, Wonderful Wander purchased a pair of sneakers again, but when putting them on they noticed something was off and the logo was on the inside. This time, commenters seemed to be agreeing more that the shoe logo was definitely on the outside, and that the Mandela Effect was at play here. Many social media users recall having a really weird feeling when they first heard about this particular example, with most of them being adamant that the ankle protector was on the outside of the shoe. The Last Supper is one of the most famous works of art. It was painted between 1495 and 1498 by Leonardo da Vinci. The painting depicted a closely connected moment with Jesus and his apostles, in which he declared that one of them would betray him. The figures are seated at a table covered with white cloth, and different platters are displayed before them. There are many hidden aspects in the painting itself, such as the presence of a woman-like figure who's said to be John the Baptist, but many have urged that this character is meant to be Mary Magdalene. The Mandela effect about this painting was popularized in the book and the movie The Da Vinci Code, and it's a pretty strange example of the phenomenon. Many who have viewed this picture distinctly recall that there was a gold chalice or goblet placed to the left of the Jesus figure, but there's no golden cup in the painting, at least not where some remember it being. The golden chalice, according to some, has moved, but it's still present in the artwork. It sits almost invisible on the wall above the very last right-hand side figure. It floats in an out-of-place way above this figure, a strange area for this artifact to be. It's often rare that we find residual evidence for this phenomenon, but one individual managed to find it. One Reddit user took to the subreddit with some residual evidence that there was once a golden goblet on the Last Supper table. He was watching the 1986 Maximum Overdrive movie for the first time, and he notes that 54 minutes and 16 seconds into the film, a clear flash of Leonardo da Vinci's painting is seen. The user adds a link as well to the image that he managed to grab, and right on the table, where everyone remembers it being, is the cup. The user then began trying to search for a copy of this image to confirm the idea of the chalice, but found only one similar to it. It took the form of a jigsaw puzzle, and again, there sat the chalice right where most people remember it being. But not everyone recalls this being the case. Another Reddit user came to the same subreddit, claiming that everyone was saying that there was a chalice in the Last Supper. They don't recall this though. Instead, they remember that there's no cup on the table, and that the idea of the chalice, or the Holy Grail, was represented by the V shape seen between Jesus and John the Baptist. It seems, though, that there are many who believe that there was a golden cup on the table, and even puzzles have been made with its addition. In Mario's vast world, which began in 1981, we meet a variety of characters in many different games that have entertained us for decades. In 1996, Mario Kart 64 was released in Japan, and in 1997, it's made its way all around the world. Mario Kart 64 is a racing game that was released for the Nintendo 64. This game is similar to the base game, where players can select a character that drives in a cart around a track. Players must employ a weapon-based system to hinder their opponents and win the race. There are many different tracks that players can race on, including Calamari Desert, Yoshi Valley, Sherbet Land, and the infamous Rainbow Road. Rainbow Road is the fourth and last course of the Special Cup in Mario Kart 64, which is set in space. It's also the sixth and last track in the whole game. It's the longest of all the tracks, spanning 2,000 meters in total, taking 2 minutes per lap. But Rainbow Road has recently become the subject of a Mandela effect. The track was notorious for its difficulty. Players would often go flying off the edge and plummet into the darkness. This was a recurring issue that eventually prompted some gamers to rage quit. The reason that everyone kept flinging off the side of the track was that it had no guardrails. Or did it? Many gamers distinctly remember that this track didn't have any railing, and they would always lose the race for this reason. Some will be shocked to find out that Rainbow Road actually does have a railing, and has had one the whole time. Since it was released in 1996, it predated the possibility of any post-release patches where new additions could be made, so it's clear that no such update occurred in the game itself. But many maintain that Rainbow Road never had guardrails. Looking at images of the game now, the rails also seem to change from star-shaped to lines. But this is one of the few Mandela effects that left behind residual evidence. When searching pictures of the same track, sometimes there are no guardrails present, which makes for a confusing Mandela effect. One Reddit user mentioned this example on the subreddit dedicated to the phenomenon. Hey Yewi explained that he distinctly recalls falling off the track countless times when he was a kid, but now looking back on it, he notices that rails have been added. According to one of the commenters, the first Mario Kart that came to Super Nintendo had the Rainbow Road without rails, so this may be what people are remembering. But the original poster explained that he only ever played Mario Kart 64, and he doesn't remember there being any wall, rail, or guard keeping players from falling off the side. Many gamers are also in agreement with this. They recall that trying to go around bends and turns was particularly difficult because nothing was stopping the player from flying off the edge. The Super Mario Wiki even specifies in detail that Rainbow Road differs from the other tracks because it has rails throughout the entirety of the route, which seems to be a random specification. This Mandela effect even found its way onto the Super Retro YouTube channel, where both hosts are in absolute shock over the idea that Rainbow Road had railings this whole time. The best explanation for this misremembering is that players may be confusing different versions of the same road throughout the series, but many gamers aren't satisfied with this theory, and maintain that the road lacked any preventative measures that stopped players from plummeting down. Funyuns is one of the most famous snacks in all of the US. While they resemble onion rings, they're actually made from cornmeal, vegetable oil, and seasoning. The most prominent of which is, of course, an onion seasoning mix that gives it its iconic taste. They were invented in 1969 by George Wade Bigner, who worked for the Frito-Lay company as a chemical engineer at the time. During his time there, he became fascinated with different types of novelty snacks, having noticed that many of the more popular snacks of the time were too bland for his and many other people's tastes. He then decided to try to invent a new, more boldly flavored snack, and he set about his task using Frito-Lay's flavor innovation laboratories. It took him just a few months to perfect his recipe, and finally Funyuns were born. He then decided to create them in the shape of onion rings, and they've remained the same ever since. It was clearly a winning recipe, as the snack has only grown in stature over time, and is still beloved by many people around the world today. The only thing that has changed over time is the snack's name, as it was first slated to be called Onyums. But right before the snack was released, Bigner was informed that Onyums were already being used by General Mills, who also sells processed foods. To find an alternative name, Frito-Lay made use of focus groups and snack naming contests between staff members. Finally, someone suggested Funyuns, and it was an instant success, as it described the product perfectly. As for their marketing campaign, they were in luck since singer Susan Christie had released a song called I Love Onions just a few years prior, and it was used in the snack's first ad campaigns, which proved to be very successful. Funyuns were an instant hit, and before long the company started releasing different flavors, but two flavors didn't appeal to customers. When wasabi-flavored Funyuns were released in 2001, they received mixed reviews, with most people describing them as unpalatable. 2015 saw the introduction of a steakhouse onion flavor, and again people were less than impressed. The snack has proved to be so popular that Frito-Lay started selling it in other countries during the 1970s, though under a different name. When they were first introduced to Brazil, they were named Cibolitos, which translates roughly to little onions. During springtime, shrimp-flavored Funyuns are sold in Japan. But the snack isn't only popular in its normal form. Some people like to throw them into a blender, resulting in the Funyuns becoming similar to breadcrumbs. This crumb can then be used in a variety of ways, such as to top off a casserole, to crumb chicken, or to add flavor to stews or soups. In recent times, though, Funyuns have been the spotlight for a different reason, especially online, as they're now the subject of what many people believe to be a perplexing Mandela Effect mystery. In a Reddit post, one user stated that they clearly remembered the snack's name being spelled Funyons, which would make sense since it includes the word onion, and they were shocked when they bought a pack and realized they were wrong. Many other people chimed in, stating that they had the same memory, and while some believe it to be the result of the Mandela Effect, others have chalked it up to a faulty memory. Rice Krispies, the extremely well-known breakfast cereal, has been around for a very long time, having been invented in 1927 by Will Kellogg, who was surprised by the sound the cereal made when he decided to add milk to it one day. He then decided to release it as a product to the public, and in 1928 they hit the shelves for the first time. People were surprised at the sound they made, just as Kellogg was. And the following year, the words snap, crackle, and pop were used in an ad campaign for Rice Krispies. One of the main selling points for the product was that it stayed crunchy when it had milk or cream added to it, unlike most cereals at the time, which would become soft and mushy, which wasn't appealing to a lot of customers. We're all familiar with the Rice Krispies mascots, Snap, Crackle, and Pop, but not everyone is aware that Snap was the first to be introduced on the side of the Rice Krispies box back in 1933, complete with his trademark hat. Crackle and Pop would be introduced in 1933 via a radio commercial. And from that day on, the trio has been featured as the brand's mascot in countries all over the world, though they only appeared together on the Rice Krispies box for the first time in 1941, though they looked much different than the characters we know today. Back then, they had long noses and red cheeks and looked much older, but in 1949 they received a makeover. The colors of their outfits were made much brighter, they looked much younger, and their hats were made smaller. In 1951, the cereal was being sold in Spanish-speaking countries, and just 4 years later, Snap, Crackle, and Pop made their very first TV commercial debut in black and white. Soon, the brand started releasing different recipes, such as Rice Krispies marshmallow treats, that could be easily created at home by melting marshmallows and pouring them over the cereal. Snap, Crackle, and Pop would undergo a few more makeovers through the next decades, the most recent being in 2008, when Rice Krispies celebrated its 80th anniversary. In 2014, a new strawberry flavor was introduced, and while it was somewhat successful, it never sold as well as the original recipe. In 2019, the world saw the release of Rice Krispie treats called Poppers that were covered in chocolate. Then in 2020, Snap, Crackle, and Pop released their first music single, followed in 2021 by a lyric video. Rice Krispie cereal remains as popular as it's ever been, and it's served at breakfast tables around the globe every morning. Rice Krispie treats are known to just about everyone on the planet, whether they buy it from stores or decide to make it themselves, and it remains a staple at kids' birthday parties every year. But this product is also one that's now spoken about as a victim of the Mandela Effect, again because of the spelling of its name. Many people have taken to online forums to explain that they're certain it used to be spelled Rice Krispies with a C, not a K. One user stated that they always knew it to be spelled with a K, but at one stage it changed to a C and then back again. But many others disagreed, stating that the name has always remained the same as it is today. Chuck E. Cheese is one of the most popular restaurant chains in the US, though not everyone is aware that it was created by the founder of Atari, Nolan Bushnell. At the time, he was involved in the sale of coin-operated video games that could be seen in arcades all over the country. But he realized that there was a gap in the market that he could use to his advantage. The machines that he was selling were bought by arcades for around $1,500, but would be making the owner between $20,000 and $30,000 over time. Bushnell decided that he could make even more money if he created restaurants where his machines were available to children, and so the Chuck E. Cheese concept was born. He decided that the restaurant should sell pizza, since it's made from an easy recipe, and that it should have animatronic animals to boot. Bushnell states that the animatronics were introduced for the sake of the parents, who needed something to amuse them while their kids were eating and playing in the arcade. Furthermore, while the arcade would often cost a lot of money, kids would watch the animatronic band for free, making the experience a little easier on the parents' wallets. He got the idea from a restaurant called Pizza and Pipes, where people would be drawn in by an organ that was played. Bushnell didn't want the expense of a live performer, and so he decided to use animatronics instead. It also isn't a well-known fact that Chuck E. Cheese was not the first choice for the restaurant chain. At first, the idea was labeled Coyote Pizza, since he'd spotted and bought a coyote costume at a trade show. He then sent the costume back to his team, who informed him that he had mistakenly bought a rat costume rather than one of a coyote. Realizing his mistake, Bushnell simply changed the name to Rick Rat's Pizza and soldiered on. But this name didn't sit well with his PR team, since rats are thought to be dirty animals, and it was exchanged to Chuck E. Cheese, the name that everyone knows today, with the E being short for entertainment. Bushnell opened the first of his restaurants in 1977, but his partnership with Atari soon came to an end thanks to a disagreement with Warner, and he was allowed to keep the rights to Chuck E. Cheese. He then teamed up with an animatronics expert named Aaron Fechter, who was able to create smooth-moving parts for the animals. But he and another animatronics artist called Bob Brock abandoned Bushnell and created their own restaurant called Showbiz Pizza Place, which was based on the same idea as Bushnell's. A lawsuit ensued, and Showbiz Pizza Place agreed to pay a portion of its profits to Bushnell for 14 years. The two companies would eventually merge, and the rest is history. In more recent times, though, Chuck E. Cheese is considered to be an example of the Mandela Effect, as thousands of people are certain that it used to be called Chuck E. Cheese, and that it's only recently been changed to include the apostrophe S at the end. Some believe that it started out with an S, and that it's been changed since twice, an event called flip-flopping in the Mandela Effect term. If you were to ask someone to name the most influential people that have ever lived, there's a good chance that they might include Gandhi in their list, since not only his image, but his deeds are etched into history books. He was born at Mohandas Gandhi, the son of the chief minister of several states in western India. He got married to a merchant's daughter at just 13 years old, though the pair had been engaged since he was 7, as it was an arranged marriage. They had 4 children together and would remain married until his wife passed away at the age of 74. By this time, Gandhi had made a vow to dedicate his life to spirituality and the service of the public, but not many people are aware that his journey up to this point had an unexpected origin. In 1888, he traveled from India to London, where he studied law, but when he returned to India, he was unable to find any work. He made the decision to travel to South Africa in 1893 instead, where he landed a 12-month contract with a law firm. Here, though, he found that discrimination was rife in the country, and he started campaigning for equal civil rights for all in South Africa, and his concept of nonviolent resistance was born. He spent a lot of time in and out of prison during this period, and eventually left the country, returning to India in 1914. Despite gaining such a massive reputation for his spiritualism and community service, Gandhi never received the Nobel Prize, though he was nominated in 1937, 38, 39, and 47, as well as in 48, but he passed away by this point, and it was decided that the prize should go to someone else instead. But no living person was found to be deserving of the prize, and that year it wasn't awarded to anyone. The Nobel Committee has since stated that Gandhi should have received the prize that year, and that they regret not awarding it to him. Gandhi lost his life to an assassin in 1948. On the 30th of January of that year, he was walking to a prayer meeting when he was approached from behind by a man named Nathuram Godse. He was disgruntled by the fact that British India had been split into 2 partitions: India, which was dominated by the Hindu faith, and Pakistan, which was dominated by the Muslim faith. He believed that Gandhi supported this partitioning and ended his life with a firearm, but would later learn that he was mistaken, since Gandhi was dead set against the plan, but had stated that he couldn't change the past even if he wanted to, deciding to focus on the future instead. Gandhi was calling for the riots and violence that occurred thanks to the partitioning to end, but Godsey mistakenly took this to mean that he'd chosen to stand with the Muslim side. Godsey and an accomplice were executed for their crimes. In modern times, Gandhi's name often appears during discussions about the Mandela Effect. Users of online forums such as Reddit state that they recall his name being spelled Ghandi rather than Gandhi, and they're shocked when they find out that they've been mistaken for decades. Others who are more familiar with history are adamant that the spelling has always been the same, but not everyone is convinced, and the debate rages on. The movie Back to the Future was released in 1985, and it was an instant hit. Audiences were enthralled by the thought of time travel, and the two starring actors, Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, kept them glued to the screen as they navigated through the adventures they encountered while in the past. The film was created by Bob Gale while he was at his parents' house. Here, he found his father's old yearbook in the basement and started wondering whether he and his father would have been friends had they been at school together. He shared this idea with Robert Zemeckis, and together they decided to turn the idea into a screenplay. But not everything we see in the movie is as it was when the script was written. Marty McFly's original last name was slated to be McDermott, and the famous scene with the clock tower was only added later. The original script called for Marty and Doc to travel to Nevada, where they were supposed to go to a nuclear test site. An explosion at the plant was supposed to send the DeLorean back to the future where it belonged, but this sequence would have cost too much money to shoot, and so it was decided to go with the clock tower idea instead. The movie was also supposed to include a chimpanzee that would have been Doc's pet, but Sid Sheinberg, the head of Universal Studios at the time, felt that no movie containing a chimpanzee had ever made a lot of money, and the decision was made to swap the chimp with a dog. This wasn't the only change that Sheinberg had in mind. He was unimpressed with the title Back to the Future, and instead suggested that it be changed to Spaceman from Pluto. But director Steven Spielberg hated this idea, and luckily rejected it. It also isn't widely known that the movie was rejected several times. It was originally supposed to be produced by Columbia Pictures, but the company rejected the screenplay, after which Gale and Zemeckis showed it to Steven Spielberg, who immediately knew that it would be a hit. He suggested that it be produced by his company, Amblin Entertainment, but the two creators felt that people would think that it was only made because they knew the famous director, and so they sent it to several studios. The script was rejected an unbelievable 44 times before finally being picked up by Universal Studios. But people are surprised when they learn that Michael J. Fox wasn't the first choice to play the character of Marty. Eric Stoltz was given the role above other actors including Johnny Depp, Charlie Sheen, and Ralph Macchio. But Stoltz failed to grasp the character, and he was fired after 6 weeks, leaving the role open for Fox to take on. Furthermore, when Christopher Lloyd was asked to play the role of Doc, he refused since he was interested in more serious roles. But when Zemeckis explained what he had planned for the film, Lloyd had a change of heart. It remains an iconic movie today, and will remain so for a long time. But despite people having watched it over and over again, it's now considered to be a Mandela Effect case. In one scene, Marty and Doc are standing in a parking lot when a van drives up and its occupants fire at Doc. Many people are adamant that the van was white and that it was a Toyota, but they're confused when they learn that it was in fact a blue VW minibus. They feel that these two details have been changed by the Mandela Effect, which is ironic given that the movie is about time travel and changing the past. Stouffer's is known as a manufacturer of frozen comfort foods, such as meatloaf, pastas, meatballs, etc. But it's now become yet another case in the Mandela Effect phenomenon, as people are certain that the company used to make stovetop stuffing and find it hard to believe that this was never the case. Stouffer's is owned by Nestle Company and originally began in 1914 as a creamery run by son and father Abraham and James Stouffer in Medina, Ohio. When the business proved to be successful, they decided to open a dairy stand in Cleveland. This was also a success, and 2 years later, Abraham and his wife, Lena, decided to convert it into a coffee shop that sold sandwiches and pies, along with cheese and coffee. 2 years after that, they, along with their son Vernon, took their first leap into the restaurant industry, and opened a location in Cleveland called Stouffer Lunch, where customers could buy sandwiches costing just 25 cents. Their other son, Gordon, then joined the business, and the restaurant business was expanded. In 1929, the business was rebranded as the Stouffer Corporation, and more restaurants were opened in Pittsburgh, Detroit, and New York City. The dishes at these restaurants were so popular that customers started asking if they could be frozen so that they could reheat them at home, giving the family the idea of starting a frozen foods company. A location was opened next to the restaurant from where these frozen dishes were sold, and soon this business started doing better than the restaurant. But more restaurants were opened across the country to varying degrees of success. Then the family decided to get into the hotel industry in 1960. They acquired the Anna Capri Inn in Fort Lauderdale, but soon also opened locations in many different parts of the country. Nestle then bought the restaurant and hotel parts of the business in the 1970s, but sold these to a hotel chain in the 1990s. Few people know that Vernon Stouffer also owned the Cleveland Indians baseball team in the mid-1960s. He had plans on moving the team to New Orleans, but these plans never materialized, and he eventually sold the team in 1972, 6 years after buying it. Stouffer's products remain as popular today as they were back then, and will likely remain in the frozen foods business for a very long time to come. But the name has also become synonymous with the Mandela Effect, as people have stated online that they have distinct memories of the company producing stovetop stuffing. It's been suggested that people are getting confused since the brand name sounds a lot like the word stove. But thousands of people refuse to accept that the company never has made stuffing, and maybe never will. Toy Story, the famous kids movie produced by Pixar Animation Studios, was released in November of 1995. And since then, it's seen 3 sequels and a spin-off film called Lightyear. A 5th Toy Story film is slated to be released in 2026, proving that the franchise is as popular as it's always been. The first Toy Story installment was the first feature-length film ever to be made using computer animation only, and paved the way for similar movies that have been released since. Although the film has many fans, few people know that it was created using a 1988 short film as inspiration. That film was called Tin Toy and was directed by John Lasseter, the same man who directed Toy Story. Many are also unaware that Tin Toy won an Oscar for Best Animated Short Film, becoming the first ever computer-generated film to do so. Another fact that takes some people by surprise is that Pixar, the studio that released Toy Story, was once owned by Apple's Steve Jobs, though it now belongs to Disney. When the movie was in the works, 4 different writers worked on the screenplay, more than most animated movies require. The original intention was for the lead toy in the movie to be the same tin musician from Tin Toy, but luckily that decision was changed, and instead we got Woody and Buzz Lightyear, who in most people's opinions were a far better choice. But Woody was also intended to be a little different than the one we know and love. Originally, he was supposed to be a ventriloquist's dummy, and rather than being the good-natured cowboy we know, he was slated to be the villain in the tale. If that plan was followed through with, the other toys would have teamed up to defeat him. When Woody's character was changed to a cowboy, the decision was made to also include a space-themed character, who at first was Lunar Larry, then Tempest from Morph, and eventually it was decided that the character should be named after astronaut Buzz Aldrin, and so Buzz Lightyear was born. While some very well-known toys, such as Mr. Potato Head, are included in the film, it was also meant to contain several others. A Barbie doll was supposed to be one of the main characters, but since the doll is owned by the Mattel Toy Company, which refused to license it for the film, it was never used. G.I. Joe action figures were also suggested, but later replaced by Green Army men that appeared in the movie. As for the voice actors, John Lasseter always wanted Tom Hanks to voice Woody, though other actors were suggested, including Paul Newman, but when Hanks saw the first footage that was created, he was immediately on board. The voice artist for Buzz Lightyear's character also took some time to pin down. It was suggested that Jim Carrey or Bill Murray might fill that role, and at one stage Billy Crystal was asked to take the job, but he was skeptical about the movie being all animation, and he declined, and the role went to Tim Allen instead. The movie has been watched countless times by millions of people, and yet it's now part of the Mandela Effect phenomenon concerning a line that Woody speaks. Many people remember that at one point in the movie, he says, "There's a snake in my boot," but they're taken aback when they find out that he actually says, "There's a snake in my boots," which they don't feel makes much sense.
There's a snake in my boots.
They feel that this is either an error or that the movie was altered by the Mandela Effect, since it would be virtually impossible for someone to have one snake in both of their boots while they're wearing them. Further exacerbating the theory is the fact that Woody toys that were sold after the release of the movie used the singular boot rather than the plural boots, leading many more people to believe that something is amiss, and they feel like this is due to the Mandela Effect. There are very few cookie brands as well known as Oreo. The very first Oreo cookie was created in 1912 on West 25th Street in New York, and this same street was the location of the very first Nabisco factory. Hence, it's now known as Oreo Way. It remains the top-selling cookie brand in the entire world, as it's sold in more than 100 countries, and since its inception, it's been released in a variety of flavors, including lemon, chocolate peanut butter, red velvet, caramel coconut, and even Coca-Cola flavor, which was hit and miss. Oreos are manufactured in as many as 18 countries around the world, and every year, 40 billion cookies are made. If this number of cookies was to be stacked end to end, they would circle our planet not once or twice, but 5 times. The brand's famous Twist, Lick, and Dunk slogan seems to be as popular as ever, since a survey has found that 50% of people who eat Oreos still twist the two halves apart before eating them, while the rest prefer to eat it as they would any other cookie. Considering that it's such a popular cookie, one would imagine that its name would have an interesting origin story, but this isn't the case. It's been suggested that it was named after the French word for gold, which is or, since the original packaging was gold-colored. But the truth is that no one knows how it got its name all those decades ago. People are usually surprised to learn that the Oreo cookie is by no means an original product, and it's actually a knockoff of Hydrox cookies that were produced in 1908 and have made a reappearance in recent years. Some of the Oreo flavors that proved to be less successful and that were then discontinued can be viewed at the Museum of Failures exhibition that's located in Los Angeles. These include flavors such as Swedish fish, peanut butter and jam, candy corn, and key lime pie flavors. One of the more popular releases is Double Stuff Oreos, which is now part of the Mandela Effect discussion. Many people feel that it used to be spelled double stuff with 2 F's rather than just the one. But others point out that this is a collective false memory, and that the name has always been spelled the same. Yet another brand that's being spoken about in the Mandela Effect forums is the well-known candy Sweet Tarts. That's due to the odd spelling that the brand contains, and thousands of people feel that it used to be spelled Sweet Hearts, as one would expect. The candies were first produced in 1963 by Menlo Smith, a St. Louis candy maker. And back then, customers had only one choice of candy, which was the chalky version that's still available today. But it's since branched out into 14 different versions, including ropes and chewy candies. For those unfamiliar with this treat, it has a slightly sour flavor, though an extreme sour version has also been released. Since then, it's been made available in many other flavors, including Fruity Splits Gummies, Cherry Punch Ropes, Twisted Mixed Berry, Twisted Rainbow Soft, and Watermelon Berry Ropes. Marketing for the brand has been interesting throughout the years, with different versions being released on different occasions. For example, Little Sweet Tarts are produced during Halloween each year, as they make for the perfect trick-or-treat candy to be handed out to kids. Sweet Tart Hearts are always popular during February in the lead up to Valentine's Day, while the chicks, ducks, and bunny shapes are marketed for Easter each year. Skull-shaped Sweet Tart jelly beans are also popular during Halloween. At one point during the 1960s, Sunline, the manufacturers of Sweet Tarts, released a version called Giant Tarts, which was a single half-inch thick tablet, though it was changed to 2 thinner tablets in the 1970s. Chewy Sweet Tarts were released in the 1980s, along with 3 smaller tablets for the giant version in the 2000s. Chewy Sweet Tarts were rebranded by Wonka as Giant Sweet Tarts, which consisted of 4 even smaller tablets. But by 2022, the candy sales were dropping, and in an effort to reach out to the new generation, it became a sponsor of the TikTok Film Festival that was held that year. Since then, the candy has seen a resurgence in popularity, not only because of marketing efforts, but thanks to the Mandela Effect that has left many people confused. One Reddit user posted to the forum saying that they always remembered the name being spelled sweet space tarts as two words, while others erroneously recall it being spelled sweet tarts as one word with two T's. Others remember it being spelled with just one T, but that the last four letters were lowercase rather than the uppercase that it's spelled with today. Another user stated that this change in spelling is a recent one that occurred only a few months ago, but try as they might, they've been unable to find any proof of the original spelling that exists in their mind. But far more people insist that the spelling has always been as it is today, and suggested that the Mandela Effect exists only in people's minds. People who live outside of the US, Canada, the UK, and Singapore might not be familiar with York Peppermint Patties, the American confection that's covered in dark chocolate, which is sold by the Hershey Company, and in these countries it's proven to be very popular. It was first produced in 1940, and while many similar snacks were being produced at the time, none were as firm and crisp as York Peppermint Patty. One employer who was present during the first sample tests stated that the candy was broken in half and it didn't produce a snap, so it was discarded. In 1940, Henry Kessler owned the York Cone Company in Pennsylvania, and he started producing the York Peppermint Patty, making them available to the market in Indiana, Illinois, Florida, and Ohio. At the time, other companies had tried to create a chocolate peppermint combination, but these were never popular with customers, since the peppermint always turned out to be too soft and mushy. It wasn't until Kessler devised a way of keeping the peppermint more crisp that the flavor combination was accepted by the public, and his patties were a hit, though many people felt that they tended to be too strongly flavored. 32 years later, the company was sold to a man named Peter Paul, who decided to distribute York Peppermint Patty throughout the rest of the country, since they'd already proven to be very popular. He's the one who came up with the slogan, "Get the Sensation," which is still used today. A few years later, Paul merged with Cadbury and York became the property of Hershey Foods Corporation. Throughout the years, many different flavors of York Peppermint Patty have been released, including a sugar-free version, chocolate truffle mint, a pink patty, peppermint baddies, and pumpkins that are created for Halloween each year, miniature hearts for Valentine's Day, and snowflakes that are usually released around the festive season. The snack has remained so popular for so long that National Peppermint Patty Day is celebrated in the US on the 11th of February each year, proving that they're likely to be around for a long time to come. But many internet users have been suspicious about the candy, since they've revealed it to be a Mandela Effect case, once again thanks to the product's odd spelling of its name. A Reddit user posted that she told her husband about the Mandela Effect a few years ago, and that he always shrugged it off as something silly that's discussed on the internet. He never paid these discussions much mind, until she made him aware of the spelling of York Peppermint Patty. They were both convinced that it used to be spelled York Peppermint Patty with a Y instead of IE at the end, and he immediately started searching for proof, known as residual evidence, by the Mandela Effect community. Since then, many more have joined in to state that they also remember it being spelled differently, and their case was made all the stronger when the user's husband found what he claimed as proof. He stumbled across a toy that was produced by a company called Lionel, and was elated to find that they spelled it with a Y. He was adamant that a toy manufacturer would never make such an obvious mistake, though many other users pointed out that this may have been done for the purpose of avoiding infringing on property rights. The Mandela Effect is blamed for many such instances, but most people feel that nothing has changed and that the phenomenon should be ignored completely. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.